Good morning, everyone. Hope you all had an excellent week and an excellent Thanksgiving season, or however you choose to celebrate during this time. And at the very least, hope you had a relaxing, fun filled, joyful time, as that's what usually we want during this time. And we're winding down here as we're on the last day of November. So, November 30th of 2025 is when I'm recording this here early in the morning. Got up kind of early here today to try to get this done, as I feel like this might be another chunky boy episode here. I have a few things that I wanted to go over here, and 1996 is what will be kind of our main course of what we'll be discussing here. It's a lot of stuff happened too, so but all good stuff though here. So kind of excited to talk about this here. And yeah, again, hope everyone had a great week. I actually had a really great time during this Thanksgiving time. Had a nice dinner, and also got some good news for our my immediate family and all. That was definitely good for our family and all, and very. It's a bit of a blessing and all on some stuff that happened. So feel very happy for that. And yeah, it was just all around a good time. And then this is also my second day off in a row, which I don't really get. So this has been kind of nice here. Definitely relax. Sometimes you do need that extra day off, right? And just to sort of like center yourself before you go back to the grind. So that's been kind of nice here. But yeah, let's start getting into it here for video game stuff. Had some modern game stuff too, also that happened, and also beat some games too, so wanted to go over that here as well too. But yeah, let's just go ahead and jump right into it here with the Relay of Gaming. And so added a few new games. I'm going back and also adding some going like old classics too also. So yeah, there might be some games going back to even as far back as the 70s that might even pop up on here. But let's just go ahead and get into it here and see what the first game is here. Alrighty, so starting off with the first game, 272. Well, let's see what that brings. And so that is Crisis 3. Oh, okay. That's a good choice there. Okay. Oh, a little bit of a technical glitch here on my end, but that's okay. Okay, here we go. And starting off with the next one. Okay, so we got now number 324. And that is going to be Duex. Or how do you pronounce this? Duex, Dusex? Dusex sounds wrong. But Duex, I guess. Or, all right, and let's go with the last one. 64. And this is going to be Assassin's Creed Origins. Okay. All right. As always, interesting choices here. And for the three of these, I don't know too much about them, so it'll be fun trying to capture some footage for these here. So to put them up on the YouTube Shorts archive there. And so starting with Crisis 3, I know Crisis 3, so this would have come out, let's see, I'm going to be a little, I'm not 100% sure on the year that it came out. I want to say somewhere around 2011 or so. That seems about right. maybe 2012. But basically, Crisis 3. So there was the first Crisis that came out, and that would have been around 2007, maybe or so. And Crisis was always known to be a very demanding game for PC. There was an ongoing meme of, can your PC run Crisis or can it run Crisis, right? And so just the way the game was made and all was it just used a very unique engine to my understanding, and it was difficult for a lot of PCs during that time to run the game. Where now, I mean, even like there's a version of it on on the original Switch, but at the time though, right, and all was a pretty demanding game. And so it's one thing that these games were known for, were just having really good engines that made some pretty realistic graphics. I think it's called like the Cry engine or so, if I recall. But yeah, the games have been very graphically impressive and all, kind of like showpieces for the times that they've come out. Specifically, more on PC, because when they were coming out for the consoles during that time, like the Xbox 360 and the PS3, I mean, they did okay versions of them and all. More specifically, I think the Xbox 360. But kind of like with a lot of games during that generation, there was they kind of struggled a bit in frame rate. But other than that, though, really, they're basically kind of like they're first person shooters, but I mean, kind of immersive. What do they call it? Immersive sims, or where it's like a first person shooter, but it's not just like all guns blazing, right? Like there's some strategy to it. There's some tactics that you need to apply, right, and all to try to clear an area out. And so it definitely makes you think a bit more, right, and all, instead of just like I said, right, going in all ramble like. And I've never I've think I've like booted up the game once at some point. How I I think I was on the PlayStation 3 version somehow. I wonder if it was a game that came out like part of the PlayStation, like the free games that were doing back then per month if you had a PlayStation subscription. Something like that and all. It's how I played it, but I do remember seeing the PlayStation 3 version, and it looked pretty impressive and all graphically and all, at least for what that system could do. And but never did actually really play this one. I did beat the first one some years ago, and I thought that was a pretty cool game. It's a bit difficult at first, but then once you kind of get used to the overall structure of the game, because again, it's not used, sometimes you have to kind of think, and all, and then also it's kind of a more open-ended environment, right? And so you have to sort of plan things out a bit more and all. And I actually found that pretty fun, and some of the power-ups that you do on your power suit was pretty cool. So I would imagine this one is that and more, and it seems to kind of, so part one mostly took place like in this jungle setting. Part two seems to take place more in the city like setting, from what I can tell. Part three, from what I understand, kind of combines both. I could be wrong on that, but that's sort of what I've seen of some of the videos of them and all. So if I'm correct me if I'm wrong on that, but that's my understanding of it. But yeah, but cool games though. It's I love the voice of the armor when you turn on your power. Like you can do this option where you activate a shield and it goes shield activated or something like that. And I just always thought that was kind of cool. But yeah, so that'll be interesting to check this game out, and maybe when I'm capturing footage for it later today, maybe it'll spark my interest to really bump it up on my kind of non-existent backlog list. I say sometimes like, yeah, maybe I'll bump up the list and all that, but then there's so many games too also that I would want to try to get to. But it does look interesting that at some point I do wish to play it. And so, yeah, so it'll be fun at the very least to catch a glimpse of it today or sometime later today. But then for the next one, so Deus Ex. So this one here, again, I don't have a whole lot of history with it. I know it came out originally on the PC, and it was a pretty beloved game by many people. Now, this is very much an immersive sim shooter where it's first person, but there's a lot of thinking that you have to do. Again, you're talking to people, you're trying to solve puzzles, you're trying to figure out how to complete an objective, and it gives you like a lot of different ways on how you can complete that objective. So it's very much a thinking man's game. And I like these kind of games. I do enjoy the concept of them. sometimes I have a hard time. So maybe maybe my I need to work on my critical thinking skills and all. But I do love that concept though, right? And there's been some that I've really gotten into. I just haven't really beaten a whole lot of them. And I remember this one. It was an early PlayStation 2 game. Well, sorry, I should say it got ported over to the PlayStation 2 fairly early in that system's lifetime. And so, excuse me, the very early months when the PlayStation 2 launched, there wasn't a whole lot for it because I think this game would have come out in sometime in early 2001 on the PlayStation 2. I could be wrong on that, but I remember it was an early game for the PlayStation 2 that was available that it was that looked somewhat, you know, something that would interest me and all because again, during the first few months it wasn't a whole lot. So I picked this game up around that time and I mean, I would have been what around 21 years or old or so, and so I hadn't really experienced these kind of games too much because it was very much like a PC kind of game, right? Only crammed onto a console, and from what I can tell, they didn't seem like they did too bad of a job. So kudos to them on that, right? But it definitely had some I mean, the game seemed a little archaic too, also, but but again, most of it is that you're thinking on how to resolve an issue on the game, and I think that's what threw me off on the game at first. Where I was like, I like the concept of it. Again, it's cyberpunk and all that, so I love that kind of stuff. But it wasn't really clicking with me when I was trying to play it back then, and I never really gave it another shot since then. So there's the version that you can get of this game on the like if you have the PlayStation Plus subscription, like it looks like it's just a port of the PlayStation 2 one. But there's also they're coming out with some kind of a remaster of this game too. I want to say I think I talked about it a few episodes back on when they announced it on one of the game shows that they did, within the past few months here. So yeah, I mean it seems cool. I like I said, this one I didn't get a whole lot into, so it'll be interesting capturing footage again for this today and see if it sparks my interest to bump it up the backlog list. But it's I did beat the because I played a little bit of this one. I got more into the Duex Invisible War, the one on the Xbox. Well, again, I'm playing these on console, right? So I don't know exactly when they came out on PC, but I played it on the Xbox. It was an early game that I bought for the Xbox, and that one actually was pretty cool. I like the concept of that one too, and I got a little ways into that one, but again, I ended up getting kind of stuck and ultimately couldn't figure it out. But I did have a fun time with it. And the one that I did actually beat though was the Deus Ex Human Revolution because there's Human Revolution and Mankind Divided, if I recall right. Mankind Divided was a more newer one. Human Revolution, I think, is the one that came out like during the PS3 and the Xbox 360 era. That one was pretty cool, and I did enjoy that one. So yeah, so it'll be interesting. Again, going back and checking out this game. But what I do know is that it's again, it seems to have a big cult following and all, where it was very influential on eventually leading to a lot of these kind of games, right? These immersive sims, and they really are fun. I mean, it's the way you can sort of because I know with Human Revolution, that one I had a really fun time with, and I was just trying to figure out all different kinds of ways, right, and all on how to get to your objective and all, and it was very rewarding, I should say. When you're playing the game and you finally figure something out, you're like, oh, okay, that's pretty cool that I did it that way, right? Maybe not the way that the most obvious way and all, but the fact that it gives you the tools to you know, complete an objective in various ways, and all was pretty impressive. And I also played a little bit of last year. I think I played a bit of that Prey game, the more recent one that came out. Well, I guess it's over been about 10 years now, but the not the original Prey one that came out on the 360, but on the more newer Xbox One and PS4, and that one's been pretty cool too. Also, so they're really cool games. I do like the concept of these games, um, but yeah, let's see. And then with the next game here, so Assassin's Creed Origins. So this game I did get a little ways into. Well, I mean, I played it for several hours. I mean, these games are long, but it's cool. It's, I don't know. For me, this is where Assassin's Creed, or I guess my little history with Assassin's Creed is part one I actually really liked. I mean, I know the the overall structure of that game could be a little outdated now, but I did like part one at the time when it came out. I've beaten that game actually like about twice now, so it's the one that I'm the most familiar with and all. Part two, I really liked also. I thought that one was excellent. I thought it was a great upgrade, and everything just felt better about that game. And really enjoyed part two. But then I played part three, and I was liking part three. I stopped playing it just because sometimes with some of these long games, I like stopped about halfway or so. you know, excuse me, and then that was part four, and then oh, excuse me. But then and so forth, right? And so after a while, I'm like, okay, I just kind of started falling behind on the Assassin's Creed series. So that's about the extent of my knowledge on a lot of these. But I mean, I've played several of them just to kind of mess around with, for like about an hour or so, just to check out what they are, and then I just haven't gone back to them. But as far as beat, so I can beat part one, beat part two, got a little ways into part three. I want to say I got about 75% through part three, right, give or take, and then again, right, just kind of dabbled with the other ones. But this one, Origins, it had my interest just because I like the environment. You're in an Egyptian setting and all, and so it looked pretty cool. And so I got a little ways into it. I don't know, maybe like about 5 hours or so, give or take. And again, I kind of dropped off of it and all, just because it's cool and all, but I do kind of miss the more traditional Assassin's Creed gameplay. As this one is cool and all, it's just I don't know, something about it that was just kind of throwing me off. And then one thing that and again, it doesn't necessarily affect the game itself specifically, like the gameplay and all, but I don't know what it is about. Now I think I'm coming up with some kind of a epiphany here. One thing that throws me off a lot about when I'm playing these more modernish games is the menus, the UI. It's sometimes they've become like so convoluted and so unnecessarily like filled with a bunch of stuff that it throws me off a lot of times. I mean, I'll say this about like a lot of like the Call of Duty games too, also, right? And then like this Assassin's Creed, I don't know, something about it and all that just throws me off, and it puts me off on the game. All right, maybe that's just a me thing and all that, but it just like there's too much like junk. I don't know how else to explain it, and I remember getting a little bit frustrated with some of that there on this game here. And but overall, though, I mean, like I said, I did like enjoy the game. I thought the story was interesting and all, and but that was just one of the things that sort of put me off on this game. Again, I know that's maybe I'm just really nitpicking there, but just kind of what I was thinking about it when I was going through this game here. And so then, like I said, right, I never played Odyssey, never played Valhalla, and no, no, wait, I lied. Somehow I remember I did check out Odyssey, like the first 30 minutes of it or so, but kind of the same thing too. I was like, it's kind of more like Origins. I was like, I'm kind of steering away from it. Valhalla, I just wasn't too interested in it, and none of the other ones that have come out since, like the what is it, the Mirage, and then Shadows. I'm just like, nah, you know. Not that I mean, again, I'm sure they're fine enough games and all that. It's just they just seem to have a lot of bloat, I guess, is kind of what I'm trying to get at. But the graphics are pretty impressive on it, though, and all. And I remember when the Xbox Series X and first came out, and then when the Origins got like a bump up to like 60 frames per second, and I think 4K or higher resolution or whatever it is, it does look really impressive, though. And so I remember checking it out for a while. That was actually where I played a bit of it, is just because I was just really impressed, with new technology and all that. I was like, oh wow, look, this game looks really shiny now, and runs really smooth. And so definitely a looker of a game. Let's see. But okay, so yeah, let's see. Did finally beat Donkey Kong Country, and so I'm talking about the original one that came out on the Super Nintendo. I mean, slowly working my way through this game, and finally, I was playing Donkey Kong a little. I was playing a little bit of Donkey Kong Bonanza last night as we were just all winding down, and I was like, you know what? I need to just go back and beat Donkey Kong Country. I was like, 'cause I'm pretty sure I'm towards the end. So kind of hunkered down for a bit and all, and ended up beating it. And that last boss did give me a little bit of a trouble, the kind of lizard king looking dude thing, but was finally able to beat him. And so yeah, so gotta say I got to finally scratch that game off the backlog there. Fun game. Donkey Kong Country is a really great game. It's a great platform and all. My only kind of issue with it though, as I was thinking about it last night after I beat it, was it's really great, but the levels did kind of seem a bit repetitive after a while because it felt like a lot of, especially maybe during that last stretch. And again, I was playing this game in different spurts, right? And also, but it just felt like a lot of it was, "Oh, okay, I'm in a mine again. Oh, and I'm doing the mine cart thing again." And then, and it just kind of seemed to repeat itself a lot on a lot of the backdrops. The stages themselves were really well done, like the platforming challenges on them and all it was really well done, but it's just some of the backdrops and all. It seemed a little bit repetitive. So I actually thought it was kind of cool when at the very end you get on that boat. But oh, excuse me. But yeah, but other than that though, great game though. And so then out of curiosity, I was like, well, you know what? I was like, I know that Donkey Kong Country 2, Diddy's Conquest, is known as like the really good one. And so I played like the first three levels of that. And yeah, so far really I really enjoy that game already. And just it seems kind of like more of the same and all that, but something about it feels a little bit more polished and all. And again, I'm just talking about like the first three levels that I beat on it. And so yeah, I think that might be another one that I'm gonna try to go through. Hopefully it won't take me, oh, I don't know, like what, 20 plus years or 30 plus years or so to beat that game. But yeah, it definitely seems cool. So maybe I'll play it kind of kind of in spurts alongside as I'm still kind of going through Donkey Kong Bonanza. And Donkey Kong Bonanza is still fun. It's a lot of fun and all that. And that one there, it's not, I've been slowly progressing through it, not because it's hard or anything. It's actually been pretty easy. It's just, again, I play for a few, just in spurts here and there. And then I get so sidetracked on that game, just, going off on different, exploring and then just finding all kinds of bananas all over the place. Because that's where I find that game to be just really fun. It's just exploring and, just trying to gather all these different secrets and all that. And I'm sure I'm still even then missing a lot of them. And that's where I have a lot of fun in that game. So that's why I've been slowly going through the game there and all. But it's been a lot of fun though, actually. So, but the game that I put a few hours into it these past few days. I had started the game a little while back, and I played like maybe up to like about 2 hours into it, and so more recently I've been playing it now more this past week, and that's a Persona 5 Royale. So I'm like, okay, I need to start getting into like a new beefy game, and so I was kind of debating if I should go through the Persona 3, the Reloaded one, or Persona 4, or Persona 5, and so finally settled in on Persona 5, as that's the one that I had already a save file going for. And yeah, so far I'm really enjoying the game. It's a very talky game, and I've noticed that with the Persona games that there's a lot of conversation in it. And so I think like some of the times when I've tried to play these games, I wasn't maybe quite expecting that. So I'm like, okay, so and again, I'm all for a good story and all that in a video game and all, as long as it's well done and it still has good mechanics and all that. But they are definitely talky though, right? And so you sometimes have to be in the right state of mind, like, okay, I'm gonna, let this game tell me a story because there is a lot of dialogue in it. But but now that I kind of know that and I went into it, I'm really enjoying it. I just because I always kind of figured that the whole concept of like you're going to school and then after that you go into this sort of like weird kind of world and all. I felt like that was gonna be very alluring just because I know that there's been like a lot of anime that I've liked that have somewhat of a similar structure to it and all, let alone that the game is very anime like and all, as far as like how it tells its story, the visuals too also, like I love the character designs and all that. And yeah, so now that I've been giving it a few hours and all, it's definitely hooking me now. So I really enjoy this game. It's a lot of fun. The overall visual, you know, art design and all that, it's very striking and it kind of hooks you. And I mean the battle system and all, so far it's been pretty good. I like where I'm at right now because again the game slowly progresses, right, and all that, and you get little bits of spurts of like gameplay and yeah, and then a lot of like talking. And so I haven't been able to. So far, what I've played of the battle system, it seems fun. It's just that it's like, okay, I kind of want more though, right? I kind of want the game to get going and all. But at the same time, I'm also really enjoying like the little story that it's got going on as well too. So this is a game that again I'm just gonna enjoy the ride, right? Just let it tell its story and all, and I feel like I'm really gonna like this game. And so yeah, kind of excited to keep going through that one there. So that'll be my next main game. And then maybe slowly on the side to also still kind of working my way through Dragon Quest 1 HD 2D remake. I think what kind of held off on that one there and jumped over to Persona 5 was because I was progressing along on Dragon Quest. I'm a little ways into it, and I came across I guess you could say like a boss battle, and it's just kicking my butt. And so I'm like, okay, I'm gonna either need to level up or really try to figure this guy out or these group of enemies out because I'm just getting demolished. And I was like, I don't see how else to beat this. And I feel like I've been playing, advancing okay on it. Like nothing else is giving me too much of a challenge, prior to that. But yeah, I'm getting my ass kicked, so I'm gonna need to go back and maybe level up some more. I know there's one armor that I can probably still get out there, but anyways, yeah, and I'm just playing it like on the normal difficulty, whatever it is, the whatever the middle difficulty is. But still, that's that package right there, the Dragon Quest 1 and 2 HD 2D remake, and also the Dragon Quest 3 one that came out last year. Really excellent upgraded ports of those Dragon Quest games, and excited to also for the Dragon Quest 7 that will be out next year. Let's see, but then also there was an update to the Nintendo Switch Online service. So we got two new Nintendo games and then two new Game Boy games. So the two Nintendo games that came out are very known as very difficult games, and that's Battletoads and Ninja Gaiden 2. And Battletoads, I actually kind of checked it out a little bit just to, again, I just played like the first few minutes of it, just to check it out when well, I think it was last night. And Battletoads is, I mean, I didn't get too far in it, like I said, right now, but it's cool. I can see why, the game would have been kind of alluring back then. I didn't get too far into it. I got into I think the second stage where you're kind of going down like um, it's like a vertical drop that you're in and you're hanging on this rope and trying to avoid enemies and all that. So I played that for a little bit and all, and of course I got killed fairly quickly on that area there. And I was like, okay, well, I just wanted to check it out. But it's pretty cool. And Ninja Gaiden 2 or Ninja Gaiden. I'm gonna say Ninja Gaiden. And that game, I mean, I love the first one. I think it's great. And I've heard that I could be wrong, but I've heard that I think part two and three get even harder. So but they seem to be kind of more or less more of the same and all that, right? And which is not necessarily a bad thing. Because Ninja Gaiden, the first one, was really great. And Bionic Commando on the Game Boy, and Kid Icarus of Myths and Monsters. I'm not familiar with these. I had almost forgotten that there was a Bionic Commando game on the Game Boy. So, but it's cool, that they're on there. I just really wish that. Well, Battletoads and Ninja Gaiden 2, those seem like games that should have been on the service already from a while back. So that's cool that they got added. But sometimes I just kind of feel like I mean, it's cool sometimes when they release games that are lesser known on the service, but it's like, where's the other big stuff though? Where's Chrono Trigger? Where's just some other games I can't think off the top of my head right away, right? And all on the service. I mean, it's not bad now. I mean, now, as of right now, right? It's not bad. We do have some pretty good stuff on there. But I still feel like there's a lot of big stuff missing, and I mean, it could be a combination of like licensing, or maybe they're just waiting to potentially re-release a game and all that, and so maybe that's why they don't bring it out on the service because they want to get more money right from us later on. And then also the fact that it's a subscription service, right? And all, it's just all kind of annoying, but you know, just the way things are nowadays. But yeah, other than that, though, I mean, those games are available there, so that's cool. Another news too, also that I mean, it's cool. I I don't know specifically what could come of this, but it seems to have a lot of people excited. So I haven't really done a too deep of a dive as to what this could mean, basically, right? But Nintendo bought Bandai Namco Singapore, and the announcement was made actually on Thanksgiving Day, I believe. So that's cool. I don't know. I mean, I know Bandai Namco, but I don't know if Bandai Namco Singapore specifically alludes to something, right? Like, I don't know if they're the ones that do a certain series. I have no idea. I did see one headline that could this mean that the Xenosaga games could be coming out? I don't know. Like I said, I haven't really done too deep of a dive to see if that's more of a realistic expectation as opposed to like just wishful thinking. But that would be cool though. Xenosaga. I guess I don't know. I mean, of all the remasters and all that they do and all, this game, this is a trilogy that I feel really deserves it because Xenosaga, it was a trilogy that came out originally on the PlayStation 2. And so it's from Monolith Software, which they're basically the main team behind the Xenoblade games, and even going further back, the game a lot of the same creators from the Xenogears game. I could be wrong on this, but I want to say it's like a husband and wife because I think it was a husband and wife that came up with the concept and all that to Xenogears, and then eventually I think they branched out to do like the Xenosaga and then Xenoblade Chronicles. And I would think with the success of the Xenoblade Chronicles that they would want to go back and remaster these Xenoblade games and oh no Xenosaga games. I mean, they were very story intensive games, and I think that if I recall, the Xenosaga was originally announced to be like a 6-part series, right? So they were getting kind of ambitious with it. Ultimately, it ended up being just 3 of them. And I mean, it's a very complex story to these games and all. And I've only played part one, and I really enjoyed part one, though. I absolutely love that game. And still, to me, one of the best endings of all time in a video game, and just a great game overall. Very talky, again, very talky and a lot, very story intensive, but it's really well done, though. And part two, I messed around with it a little bit, and part two is also kind of known to be a bit of a black sheep, but still, though, in all, it seems like it's continuing this overall great saga, right, and all of the story that it's telling. And then part three looks like where it got really good again, also. But I haven't really messed around with that one there. But again, I don't know if that's all speculation and all that, but that would be really great if they do release Xenosaga of some sort, remastered or some extent. So here's hoping. Other than that, I have no idea what this can entail, but people seem excited about it, so cool. Hopefully something cool will come of that. Um, Potentially Cyberpunk 2 seems to be getting announced, or not announced, but just like speculation that it's that it's in the works. I saw something about that it could take place in sort of a Chicago like setting. So that's cool, I'm still working my way through the first Cyberpunk game. I love that game so much. I just love exploring in it and living in this cyberpunk world and all that. And now that I got Johnny Silverhand and Keanu Reeves and and all his shit talking that he does in it, it's that game it's just really great. And I've been actually mainly playing it now on the Switch too because it runs really well on there. I'm really astounded by how well that game runs on the Switch too. And yes, you can play it in better looking versions and all, but like again, I don't have a PC that I can play it on, right, to really deck out the specs on it. But I have the Xbox Series X version that I can play, and that one it does look nicer. It runs a bit smoother, right, and all, and there doesn't seem to be as much pop in and all, and but sometimes I go back and forth between them and all because I like playing the most of the times if I'm sitting down on the in front of the TV and all that, I tend to play it on the Xbox Series X. But there's the other day I was just a little lazy. I was playing it on the handheld, and then I was like, I'm just gonna pop it into the to my Switch too and play it on the screen TV like that instead of turning on the Xbox Series X, which again, it's first world problems. But I was just a little lazy, and I'm playing there on the Switch too on this TV, and I'm like, it's not that much of a downgrade, really. I mean, yeah, it doesn't quite run as smooth, but I actually maybe this just has to do with the way my TV outputs the image. But I also feel like the Xbox Series X, it looks a bit more brighter, and these are just on the default settings, so obviously I can go in there and adjust it. But where the Switch 2 version looks a little bit not dimmer, but it just looks more not quite as bright, but and I say that in a good way though. And so there's actually certain things that I kind of like a little bit more about the Switch 2 version. But yes, it does run smoother on the Xbox Series X and all that, but not by a whole lot. I mean, the difference is basically not that much. Now again, I'm not someone that has like the tools and all to really break it down to like, oh well, this is why this one's better, and this one's better, and all that. But just to my naked eye and all that, and all, I'm like, it's not that bad. I mean, it's really you're not. I'm not, and up to the point where I'm like, you know what, I'll keep playing it like this on the Switch too, and on the big screen TV, and that I didn't mind it at all, right? So that's a really great pour. I'm really impressed with it. But yeah, but Cyberpunk 2 though sounds like it's gonna be eventually a thing at some point. And another thing too, also that kind of caught my interest on this, and this has been something that has been out already for a little bit, but I'm just barely being made aware of it. This is more like on the emulation side. And so there's apparently some apps that you can install, like if you have an Android-based device, so whether, like for example, your smartphone, if you have like an Android phone, or if you have one of the many numerous emulation devices out there, like for example, the Odin 2, the Retro Pocket, 5, or for example, and that's that you can run Steam on uh, on these devices through like an app called Game Hub. Or there's another one too also that they mentioned. I forgot the name of it. But that's interesting. And because I think with something like the Odin 2, I think you can run a decent amount of games on there that are a little bit more higher end, right? Like, I mean, I don't know for sure. I was trying to watch some videos of it, and all, a lot of people were playing games like kind of more like indie like games, like for example, like Hollow Knight, Silk Song, and all, which is cool. But if it can run anything like seventh generation games, right? So like, yeah, I don't know, like let's say the Skyrim, or like the Tomb Raider trilogy, or along those lines and all, that actually is very appealing to me, that to play it like on something like on a like on the Odin 2 and all. So I might start messing around with that a little bit. And because like I like the Steam Deck, it's a great system and all, but sometimes it can be a little bit bulky. So if I can play it on something a little bit smaller and all, like on the like on the Odin 2 for example and all, I'm intrigued by this. So I might try to mess around with that at some point. If I do, I'll give a bit of an update on just my personal thoughts on how it is, how easy it is to set up, and realistically what you can expect to play on it, and things like that. But let's see. But probably one of the major news stories that came out this week that definitely was a cause for concern is, so I just saw a video of it, and also I'm going to just kind of go over really quickly what I understand of what's going to be happening potentially. And so there's a concern here that the prices of video games are going to increase, and this could be across the board, right? Maybe some companies might be more affected, specifically from what it sounds like. Xbox seems to be someone that might have dropped the ball on this. But what I understand of it is that there seems to be a shortage, like some kind of a chip shortage of like DRAM or VRAM or something like that. Again, I'm not too familiar with all that. But from what it sounds like, because of this shortage, or I should say that the reason that there's a shortage of this is that it looks like AI is kind of, AI is starting to dominate a lot. And that's having a big snowball effects across the board everywhere, right? I mean, no, without getting into like more, the politics of it and all that, and how that's affecting, the economy and things like that and all that, right? I'll steer away from that just because I'm not going to be the most knowledgeable to talk about that kind of stuff and all that. But I'm sure that a lot of us can feel the potential threat of all that. Well, as far as it comes to video games, where the concern is of that is that they, somehow, however they do their AI infrastructure and all that, right? It's demanding a lot of like power, a lot of probably chips and all that, right? And all, again, I don't know the full extent of it, but it seems like there's a bit of a shortage of these chips across the board. And some companies, like I think I heard something that Sony did stock up on some of these chips, but some companies didn't. And Xbox's name came up. So if you don't have a lot of these chips available, like stored away somewhere, then, well, the next thing is that, it's expected that a lot of these companies might end up raising their prices yet again. Like, let's say if Xbox does it, I mean, that would be, they've already raised their prices twice this year. And so they potentially might do it again here soon, is sort of what I'm gathering. So, I mean, all the way across, right? And all, it's just, gaming is starting to get really expensive now, and along with everything else, right? And all, but again, I'm just sticking to video games here, and so at in these times and all that, this is where I would definitely just kind of give a reminder, right? Because I was watching a lot of videos on that not so much on the new I mean that news, but then it prompted a lot of like videos that I was watching online, and it seems to be from like gamers that are a bit on the older gamers, right? Not old, but maybe around my age, maybe a little bit younger and all. That's just kind of started reminiscing about the good old days, right? And so I can see why it was prompting that a lot, because it's part of the reason why I started this channel, and it's just to there's a lot of great stuff coming out in the video game industry, right? So not to, take away from the good stuff that's been out there, right? Like just this year alone, right? We got Clear Obscures, Hollow Knight Silk Song, things like Hades 2, Shinobi Art of Vengeance, the Ninja Gaiden Ragebound, and a lot of other good stuff, right? So it's not to take away from that stuff and all. And if anything, this year, because it is so heavily dominated by a lot of independent games that have been like at the top of the like the highly reviewed games and all that. Maybe it's kind of a sign, right, that things could be steering in a different direction and all that. But we'll see. But basically, it's there's been a lot of ugly things, practices that have been happening, and again, a lot of it is no fault of like the industry itself. Potentially, it's just the way that things are nowadays. But it's it definitely was different back then, and it's just a changing of the times and all that, right? And so it's cool, for me, if in my personal opinion, was it better back then? Yes, for me it was. And it's just because, games were completed back then. Games were more it just seemed like the creators were able to use their imagination more, where they weren't tied down by a bunch of corporate BS and all that. And so I felt that there was just more of a creative output of games, a more just quantity output of games too also. So it was quality and quantity. I talked a bit about before on this podcast that we were just getting like a great game each year, right? And all, and whether if it was from a series that you really liked or just great games in general, and there was a lot of new IPs, a lot, or even if it was existing IPs, there was just a lot of freshness to them and all that. And it's not to say that sometimes the games didn't get stale after a while and all. Like for example, at one point we had a lot of platformers, or at one point we had a lot of fighting games, or at one point we had a lot of like first person shooters that then people were getting kind of tired of them and all. But even then, though, I mean, it still seemed like there was still a lot of creativity in the industry and all that. Where now, it like, and I'm talking about like the AAA publishers and all that, where it's just things just became heavily corporatized and all. And now because of the way everything is going in the industry and all, it's not just so much that things are just more expensive. It also seems like it came also at the cost of a lot of like creativity in the industry. And so there's something that just seems gone, right, from the video game industry and all, that that there was a certain magic that has been kind of lost. And so, it's I do feel like it was certainly better, right, back then. Having said that though, it's also it's a different time. And I think that's one thing that at least I know for me personally, we just sort of have to start realizing it. And I mean, we can hang on to our hobbies as much as we like, right? And all for, when it was the good old days and all that. When that's not just with video games, right? That could, like, I could say the same thing for me personally with music and movies and all, and just, like entertainment stuff. And it's, I don't, I mean, I think it goes a little bit beyond just, because I think when you get older, you do sort of just start grasping on to the things that you used to love, right? It's nostalgia. You're getting older and all, and so then I think your mental capacity just doesn't have like the bandwidth and all that, right? To try to keep up with the latest and greatest and all. It is not that you're losing your passion necessarily for something that you really love. It's just that after a while, things do kind of start changing, right? And nowadays, on now this is, but this has been kind of and also a very drastic change, right? Where the way that the not only the video game industry, but just everything is heading now, right? Where everything is more quick consumption, right? Short short form videos and live service game, right? And all gaming and all that. And because this new generation is going to start adapting to the things that the way the world is nowadays. Because like there's a study that came out fairly recently, right, where they were talking about how a lot of people aren't buying like games as much anymore, that a lot of them are just going to like live service stuff. But at the same time, why is that? I mean, gaming is expensive nowadays. And so for someone that is young, you know, whether if you're the young person themselves or the parent of a young person, right, and all that's like into video games and all that, but they're doing live service stuff, it's because it's a lot more appealing to get into a game that is free to play. And sure, you eventually you might end up spending more money on a free to play game than you would like saying like buying one game. But at the initial onset, I mean, let's just say if you're in a struggling family, right, like a lot of people are nowadays, and you have a kid and all that wants to get into gaming and all, but it's like, oh my god, you're $70 for, $80 for whatever it is for Donkey Kong Bonanza or whatever, or any other popular like single player game out there and all, where, oh, look at Fortnite, well, it's free to play that, oh, and you could just buy a few skins or whatever, and for like $5 initially. Okay, there you go. That sounds a lot more reasonable, right, for a lot of families nowadays. And so I think it's a combination of that the form of entertainment that the youth is getting into, combined with the economic struggles of nowadays, is kind of is why we're seeing this effect now, right? Or getting back into like retro video games, but maybe not necessarily buying the console and then going out and searching for old games. I mean, that's still a thing, I believe, but why potentially these emulation devices are becoming so popular, right? Again, how people are acquiring these ROMs, again, that's another thing. But I think it's just a combination of all that there, right? And all that. It's just sort of like, they're, the youth and all that's coming up here, they're doing what they can to be entertained and all that, but with the hand that they were dealt, is if I'm making any sense here. And so I get that completely and all, and I think that, but that has had a big effect and all on just how we're consuming media, what kind of media we're consuming. And so it's was it better back then and all? Yes, absolutely. For me, it was, and I don't say that. I don't think I'm saying that just specifically because of nostalgia, but at the same time, right? People are adapting to the times as well too, and it's we're in very interesting times nowadays, and so people want to be entertained, but at the same time, they're being entertained in the ways that is the most financially reasonable for them, and also just with the way things are nowadays, with how people like to consume media nowadays, and all. But anyways, just I a lot of the videos that I saw and I'll kind of touch base on that, and all as I was watching them, I was like, yeah, I was like, I get that sentiment for sure. But it's also just it's the changing of the times, and I think it's just one thing that we all go through, a lot of different generations go through and all that, like, our parents used to say like, oh, they don't make it like they used to and all that. Well, we're kind of saying that, but it also has been a drastic change in what's happened, for better or worse, however you want to look at it that way and all, but it's pretty much inevitable, right? Just, like the loss of physical media, we're going all digital, and, then the repercussions that could have, and, where you're not feeling like you own something and all. And so it's interesting times, I guess I will say that much. But like I said, also kind of what prompted me to start this channel and all, where I can sort of highlight the quality years of video gaming, not sort of as a way to say like, oh, it's better back then, and all that, but just more as a warm invitation to like, hey, it's great, for like, for like generations, I mean, I don't know how long my dumb little podcast here will last and all, but just a way to like, for years to come and all that, where somebody, right, whether if it's somebody that's of my age and all that, it's like, I just want to go back and relive some old memories. I just want to have like an archive of like information, and also what I'm trying to do with my YouTube shorts and all, to sort of have like a digital library of just like a glimpse at like some old video games and all, or discussions about them, or for like a newer gamer and all that, and I was like, I keep hearing about the young, the old days and all, the video games were so much better. Well, hey, this is kind of what it was all about, right? And then at the very least, people can, have like some kind of a, information out there, what it was, right? And if you're listening to my podcast, what I'm talking about, or if you're going through like my virtual or my YouTube shorts and all, just to get a glimpse of like what video games were all about and all. And you might look at it and say like, oh, those games were stupid. Okay, that's cool, but at the very least, no, you got an idea of what it's all about. And right, some of us old hands and all, reminisce about these old days. But anyways, I went off on a little tangent there. I don't know if any of that made sense at all, but yeah, that's just some quick thoughts that I had on that. Um, but what I ended up here, and what I'm going to try to do is during this modern gaming section, is if there's like a major story that I feel is worth really getting into and all that has me excited or whatever the case might be, I'll try to end it on that for this section here. And so I just came across a video about this yesterday that has me kind of excited. Nothing that's been confirmed, but from what it sounds like, there's some pretty compelling evidence that something cool might happen. And so what is that? It's okay. Now, if you've been following video game news or anything like that, and if you're a fan of RPGs, this is probably going to get very tiring to hear, but at the very least, you haven't really heard it from me. And that's the Final Fantasy IX remake. We've all been kind of going through this for years and years. Is it coming out? Oh, it's not coming out. Is it coming out? No, it's not coming out. Or there's no confirmation, or it was in development hell and now it's been put on ice, blah, blah, blah. Now, recently, what looks like happened is that, so I was watching this one dude that does like a lot of like JRPG stuff and all. And so I'm not too familiar with a lot of this stuff here and all, but it looks like it's something that could point that it could be happening. And that's that there's some kind of a mobile game. I think it's called Another Eden. Something like that, right? I might get some of my information wrong here because, again, I just saw a video of it late last night and then I just made quick notes of it here. But some kind of a mobile game called Another Eden. And there's going to be a crossover. So this is official, right? Like they've already, this is already done deal. There's already like video footage of it out there and all. And that's that they're having a crossover with Final Fantasy IX. And on this crossover, if I'm looking at the graphics, I mean the Final Fantasy IX characters look amazing. They look really cool. It's like almost like a almost they have a little bit of a cell shaded look to them, a little bit kind of not no not the, let me back up. Not cell shaded, but kind of along the lines of like I don't know, like some of the more modern like JRPGs that have been out there, like that Trails of the Sky kind of look and all, where they have like a heavy black line outline to them and all. I don't know if I'm getting my comparisons right there, but they look nice, basically. All right. And so they're having some kind of a crossover with this game. From what it sounds like, what this dude was saying was that what they announced, and again, I'll have to fact check this and all, because again, I'm just going off of what this dude was talking about. But he's seemed like it's a pretty reliable source, and the dude's name is like David Inc. I think, and so he follows the stuff a lot and all. But basically, if I understood what he was saying was that this game, so with these mobile games and all that, right? They come out with like their seasons or they have like their schedule or whatever it is. And so they're going to do this crossover for like the next 6-7 months or so, something like that. And then it's going to end on July, I forgot the date, but on July 6th. Let's just say July 6th. Again, I could be getting my dates wrong. So, okay, so that's an interesting date to end on. But it seems like the following day, whatever that day is, so let's say it's July 7th, is that was the actual day when Final Fantasy IX originally came out, going back. I mean, we're going back now, what? So it would be 26 years, right? Which kind of an odd anniversary date and all, but but it'd be 26 years if I'm doing I think 26. And so they said something like on that day there was going to be a big Final Fantasy IX announcement. So this is like, from what I understand, this is like official information that had come out. And so it seems like what this dude was saying was that they've done things like that before in the past with he gave the example of like Chrono Cross. So they did something similar. And then eventually after it went through its season or whatever it is, that it after all that is when they finally announced or it was released or whatever the Chrono Cross remake or the remaster that they did somewhat recently. So it seems to be following the same trajectory as that. And so they announced, right, there's like a big Final Fantasy IX announcement. So that's been official. Could it end up being just a lot of merchandise and all that, or like some kind of this anime that they were working on at some point? Maybe, right? But, I mean, could be. And just like the graphics that they were showing from the Final Fantasy 9 characters on this mobile eating game or another eating game or whatever it's called, it looked pretty stunning. So like I was like, if they would take that graphical style and then just apply it to like the overall remake, to the full game of Final Fantasy 9, that'd be pretty amazing. I would be happy with that. So just keep mostly, and then some quality of life improvements and all, like maybe speed up the battles a little bit and things like that. That I would be satisfied with that, right? If they came out with something like that, but we'll see. Like I said, it's speculation right now and all, but it seems like it's something that could potentially happen. I'm going to try to watch more videos on it and all that because it looks like the information came out somewhat late yesterday, and so I wondered if there's more information out there on it today. But just thought I'd throw that in there because that would be pretty exciting there. But yeah, let's see. Let's start getting now into 1996 for video games. So 1996 here. Let's get out of our headspace here for modern gaming and go back in time. Back to the good old days. 1996 is a good year in that in that at that time because it was where the fifth generation really got going, and there was just it was really starting to show what this generation could be, right? Because we had like the 3DO, the Jaguar, the FM Sound Marty, the Omega 32, and whatever other stuff was coming out during that time, in that early fifth generation cycle. But they weren't, so a lot of the games were not the most polished, and all that. And, the 3D was, people were learning, right, how to create games in a 3D space. This is the first year, and it's not to say that there wasn't any good 32-bit games prior to this, but I felt like this is the first year where it was like, okay, this is what this generation can do. Look at these games here, right? And all, there was a lot of great stuff for that, and that was across the three main systems that ended up being. So, I mean, the Sega Saturn was a bit of a flop, but it still had good stuff on there. And then the PlayStation, and then eventually we got the Nintendo 64 this year also, or at least here in the States anyways. And so we'll go over that here. All right, so starting off here. So 1996 saw many sequels and prequels in video games such as Super Mario 64, Duke Nukem 3D, Street Fighter Alpha 2, Super Mario RPG, King's Field 3, Virtual Fighter 3, we'll get into that a bit, along with new such titles as Blazing Heroes, Nights into Dreams, Crash Bandicoot, Pokemon Red, Green, and Blue, Resident Evil, Dead or Alive, Soul Edge, Quake, and Tomb Raider. The year's best-selling video game console worldwide was the PlayStation, while the best-selling consoles in Japan were the Game Boy and Sega Saturn. Good job, Saturn. The year's best-selling home video game worldwide was Super Mario 64, while the highest-grossing arcade games in Japan were Street Fighter Zero 2 or Street Fighter Alpha 2 and Virtual Fighter 2. For hardware, so the Sega Model 3 and arcade system board considered to have the most technically impressive graphics at the time. Excuse me. So that was on February 21st when that came out. So I'll talk about the bit this here now, so I don't forget later. Again, I'm just kind of going off the cuff here when I do this. I'm not, my notes that I make are just kind of like, oh, kind of half-assed. But yeah. So the Model 3, Sega's Model 3 arcade board. It was, I mean, I've already talked about how impressive things were right prior to, like, when we were making the jump from 2D to 3D and all that. But I remember when I first saw the screenshots of Virtual Fighter 3, I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is the future. This is amazing, and this is playable." And so then immediately I started thinking, right? Like, if fighting games look like this, what are like RPGs going to look like? What are adventure games going to look like and all that? So my mind just starts going crazy, right? And all with how games were going to look. And yeah, I mean, Virtual Fighter 3, because that was the first game, right? And all that came out for this Model 3. And basically, I don't know, without going into the whole specs of it and all that, but it was just a really impressive arcade board. And I mean, it's, because I want to say actually that, let's see, this good. there was because I know there was a racing game called like Scud GT, and I think that might have came out before Virtua Fighter 3 on this arcade hardware. Let's see. I could be wrong on that, but I want to say, um, I'm trying to look some information up here on it, but it was this racing game, Scud GT, and then also the Virtua Fighter 3. So again, if they came out roughly around the same time or not, I'm not sure, but I remember seeing. I ultimately didn't see these games until the following year, 1997, and that was because we went over to Seattle at the time. I was trying to go to school there, and we knew also that they had a arcade that had just come out, and I think this arcade or this chain of arcades, Steven Spielberg, I think if I recall, had something to do with it. It was called like Game World or Game something, I think. And so when we went there, I mean, because I remember we were in the big city. We went to this arcade and it had the highest technological advanced video games there. And I remember seeing that Scud GT and Virtua Fighter 3 there. And my poor little teenage brain, I was like, this is freaking amazing, and I just I got super excited about still right about and again again I'm gonna sound like an old man here and all, but this is why it was so exciting for us back then, because it was just like there was just constant improvements to the technology that it just made our minds go wild at the potential of what video games were gonna be. Now when you look back at these games and all, I mean, they're still graphically impressive. They still hold up, but obviously they can't hold a candle to what's like available now. If you're just talking about like just pound for pound raw graphic fidelity. But but the difference is that nowadays, like if I'm looking like, 5 years from now, how much, better are games gonna be, like, gameplay, graphic wise and all that. I mean, I can't really see it being too much different from where we're at now. I can't really. But back then, I mean, I'm thinking like, what I was looking at, like let's say like in 1990 or 1991, and then I'm looking at something like Virtual Fighter now. I mean, oh, that's a huge change. So then I'm thinking, well, what's going to be 5 years from now, right, and so forth, on how much things were going to look like and play like and all that. So basically, there was just this consistent excitement for video games because of how crazy things were advancing and how fast it was. Because we're barely getting into the fifth generation at home, but we started seeing like sixth generation quality graphics in the arcades, right? And so that was just absolutely mind blowing. And but yeah, but Virtua Fighter 3, I remember they when they started showing screenshots of it and all, and they would show the Dural, who's like the last boss in the Virtua Fighter series, that they made her look more or less like the T-1000 from Terminator. And so seeing like all the reflections on the liquid metal and all, because I didn't see the demo at the time, but seeing the screenshots of it, but then afterwards I've seen the actual demo that they showed, and it shows this Dural character, so it's kind of like forming, right, I know, from the liquid metal and morphing itself into like a humanoid figure. And again, me being a big fan of Terminator 2 and all that, I was like, holy shit, we're gonna see things like the T-1000 in real-time graphics. That's mind-blowing. And so yeah, like that was just such an exciting time and all that. And and so I because I knew I saw that game in 1997, but looks like the Model 3, according to this, came out as early as February 21st of 1996. So now that was in Japan, I think, first when it came out, and then eventually came out here to the States. But the technology existed as early as then, so that's pretty cool. Anyways, so November 23rd, Bandai's Tamagotchi Virtual Pet Handheld looks like was released, along with also the Nintendo 64, the first true 64-bit home console. Now that would have been in Japan when that came out. And then Nintendo's Game Boy Pocket. Oh no, wait a minute. What am I talking about here? Well, I think that can be right. We're in 1996. The Nintendo 64. I, am I wrong on this? I could have swore that the Nintendo 64 came out in September of this year. Well, okay. Well, I guess I'll figure it out here as I'm going along through here. Um, but anyways, but also the Nintendo Game Boy Pocket handheld console, 30% smaller version of the previous Game Boy handheld, was released. And then Sega's Netlink modem for the Sega Saturn came out too also. So as far as like online gaming, you can do it as early as looks like 1996. And there was a handful of games that supported this. So there was like Virtual On, Sega Rally Championship. Let's see, I think Duke Nukem 3D and a version of Daytona USA, I think were some of the games that supported this. So not a whole lot of games, and like I said, the Saturn wasn't ultimately that popular, but you could play online gaming back as far back as that, thanks to Sega. Good job, Sega. You probably spent a whole lot of money on making all these cool innovations and all that, but it was also part of probably why it was part of your downfall as well too. Oh, Sega. But let's see. But then also the SNK Neo Geo S or CDZ was released in Japan, and Namco's Alpine Racer arcade game, including a new type of user interface, came out. So Namco was also putting out some pretty impressive stuff in the arcades as well too. And also, the debut of the Apple's Pippin console came out. So Apple made a console at one point. I don't know a whole lot about it other than it was a flop. But yeah, it came out this year though, for what it's worth. I don't even know like what kind of games came out for it and all. I just know that it just didn't do that well. But let's see. But the discontinuation, though, so see, this is where a lot of the stuff that had come out before just failed. And so it was like, because the big boys came into town, right? The Sega Saturn, the PlayStation, and the Nintendo 64. Because 1996 saw a major shakeup in the crowded home console market with the Virtual Boy, Atari Jaguar, 3DO, Sega CD, 32X, and CDI all being discontinued. So those, pretty much all of those there are like, 32-bit like systems or 64-bit, I guess, 64-bit Atari Jaguar, and yeah, they all got discontinued. So like I said, it was just like they were testing out the waters of what this technology can be, but it took Sega, Sony, and Nintendo right now to really show us like, and that's why I think this year was really impressive as far as like again what this generation could bring right and all, because it's they were the ones that really brought out the big guns. For Game of the Year awards and all, I mean, pretty much across the board. I mean, from all these different magazines back then and all, Super Mario 64 was a game of the year for a lot of people this year. Not my personal favorite game of the year, but I'll get into later what my game of the year was for this year. It's a bit of a more of a niche title, but yeah, but Super Mario 64 was definitely the most influential. I mean, there was a lot of great games that came out this year and all that, a lot of revolutionary titles, but Super Mario 64 was one of those generational games. Um, but let's see. The highest grossing arcade games. So let's see. So this is in Japan, but number one was Street Fighter Zero Two. Number two was Virtual On and Cyber Troopers. Number three was King of Fighters 96. Number four was Virtual Fighter 3. So again, yeah, so it did come out in this year. And let's see, number five was Dungeons and Dragons, Shadow over Mysteria. Number six was Psychic Force. Number seven was Ray Storm. Number eight was X-Men vs. Street Fighter. Number nine, Real Bout Garo Densetsu or Real Bout Fatal Fury. And number 10, Battle Garega. But in the United States, looks like it was for Daytona USA, and then Cruising USA, and then Tekken 2, and then Area 51, and then Alpine Racer, and then Die Hard Arcade, and then Metal Slug, and then Point Blank, and then Deck Athlete, and then Strikers 1995 or 1945. And for best-selling home video game systems, so this is supposedly worldwide. So number one, Super Mario 64 was 2,903,000 units. Number two was Tekken 2 was 2,620 units. Number three was Resident Evil with 2,316 units. 16,000. 2,316,000 units. Number four was Super Mario RPG on the Super Nintendo for 1,995,000. Number five was Donkey Kong Country 3 was 1,674,000. Number six was Pocket Monsters Red, Green, and Blue, which I'm assuming that's Pokemon, with 1,663,000. Number 7 was Donkey Kong Country 2 with 1,612,000. And number 8 was Wave Race 64 with 1,154,000. Number 9 was Dragon Quest 3 for the Super Nintendo. So, like a remake, I'm assuming, or a remaster. And then number 10, Madden 97 with 1 million units on the PlayStation 1. Hmm. And let's see. All right, but then going to events here. So it looks like in March, the Swedish video game magazine Superpower changes its name to Superplay. July 15th, Tom Kalinske announces he will leave his position as president for Sega of America on the 1st of October. And so I'm going to jump back to that here in a bit. But then May 16th to 18th, the second annual E3 is held in Los Angeles, California, United States. And let's see, September 7th, so Sega opens Sega World London as part of the London Trocadero in England. It is the first Sega World Park to open outside of Japan. And then October 1st, Tom Kalinske resigns as president of Sega of America. And then on December 31st, Battle.net Classic is released. So, yeah, let's see. So basically, there was a lot of, ultimately my understanding of it, and again, we have more of the perspective of here from what happened with Sega of America, just because Tom Kalinske and several others that worked during this time have been more vocal about it. But ultimately, it looks like there's a really great video out there. I forgot the channel, but it really dives deep into what happened to Sega, right? Because a lot of times the initial thought is that so Sega died after the Dreamcast, right? And as far as them being in the console race, but the thing is that there was a lot more that happened prior to the Dreamcast that basically Sega was just hemorrhaging money, and the Dreamcast was sort of like a last ditch effort to try to save them, but it was just too little too late. So it wasn't the Dreamcast necessarily that buried them. There was a lot that happened prior to that. And basically, there was just a lot of things that Sega of America just wasn't doing really well. I mean, with the 32X, to some extent, the Sega CD, the botched launch of the Sega Saturn. And so it looks like Tom Kalinske was trying to do a lot of things in the background and all to try to make it work. But between Sega of Japan, looks like not really being on the same page as Sega of America, a lot of games not being released over here. Sony, which was just kind of an unstoppable force too, also. I mean, that can't be overlooked as well too. It just ultimately, I'm sure he was just kind of like, you know what, forget this. So I think that's part of the reason why he ended up leaving, at least from what I've heard on that side of the story. Again, we don't have a whole lot of information from the Japanese perspective on all this here, but yeah, but ultimately it looks like he ended up resigning, and so it ended up being Bernie Stolar, if I recall, that took over. Yeah, I think it was Bernie Stolar that took over after that. But business, let's see. So in February, Blizzard Entertainment acquires a development group known as Condor, renaming it Blizzard North. In April, Eidos Interactive acquires Centric Gold, which holds Core Design, creator of Lara Croft and US Gold. Let's see. On May 1st, GameSpot and GameFAQs are launched. And so that's a thing still going on today. June, Firaxis Games is formed by Jeff Briggs with Sid Meier and Brian Reynolds. July, let's see, GT Interactive purchases Humongous Entertainment. July 24, CUC International Inc. purchases Sierra Online, Blizzard Entertainment, and Davidson and Associates for about $3 billion in stock swap. July 30th, Atari Corporation reverse merges with JTS Inc. August 6th, AOL buys Sierra Imagination Network from AT&T for reported $15 million. August 24th, Valve is founded. September 1st, AOL closes Imagination Network, the first online video game with graphics after 5 years of service. September 29th, IGN is founded. So they go as far back as 1996. November 13th, Tom Clancy and Virtuous Corp found Red Storm Entertainment, headed by Doug Littlejohns. Then Infogame Entertainment SA acquires Ocean Software Ltd. And then Midway Games, subsidiary of WMS Industries, acquires Atari Games Corporation from Time Warner. Technos Japan Corporation, original creator of the Neketsu Kawa Kunio Kun series and Dragon or Double Dragon series, goes out of business. Assets acquired by Atlas. Oh. Black Isle Studios forms as a division by Interplay. Doesn't use Black Isle name until 1998. Game Park Inc., founded in South Korea. The company formed by Microprose and Spectrum Holobyte in 1983 starts using only the Microprose name. Okay, I was going because I remember seeing Spectrum Holobyte on some games. So okay, so I guess that's what happened. Overworks Ltd. is formed. Z2 Limited form is formed. Excuse me. Nintendo of America Inc. versus Computer and Entertainment Inc. So it looks like another lawsuit. Good job, Nintendo. And the 3DO company purchases New World Computing. Oh, okay. Very interesting. So a lot of stuff happening there within the industry there. And so yeah, let's see. Let's just kind of start getting into some of this stuff here for video games, actual video games here. So before we start getting into all the cool stuff that was happening with the fifth generation. Oh, there goes my microphone again. I don't know why does this thing keep rotating on me? Okay. But before we start getting into all that stuff, though, 16-bit or fourth generation was still, they were still having some stuff come out on it. So we had Sonic 3D Blast for the Sega Genesis, and that also came out on the Sega Saturn. I don't quite recall if they came out at the same time or if the Sega Saturn version came out a little bit later. I'm not 100% sure on that, but yeah, but Sonic 3D Blast and Sonic 3D Blast, it's okay. It was actually another Sonic game that I did kind of get into because I got it on the Saturn, and it's like because I think I did beat it back then, but it's okay. It's like an isometric Sonic game, and so you are a little bit limited by the perspective and all as far as like how fast Sonic can move, and you're just basically trying to save like these what is it like these little birds or animals and take them to like a certain checkpoint that allows you to advance more in the game. It's all right. It's not a bad Sonic game, but it's definitely a different kind of Sonic game, and it's made by I want to say Tales Travelers. I think it was the name of the developers. Which they're actually really good developers and all. They've made some other cool games, but that's uh, that's yeah, it was an alright Sonic game basically. But on the Sega Genesis actually has a pretty impressive 3D bonus stage. Yeah, so for what it's worth. But on the Super Nintendo side, though, we had probably the more two big name games that came out this year for them was Donkey Kong Country 3. What I understand is Donkey Kong Country 2 seems to be the really good one, right? But this one seems it was good too, also, right? And also Super Mario RPG. So Super Mario RPG it takes the Nintendo characters and the whole Nintendo world, the Mushroom Kingdom and Bowser and all that stuff. But it was developed, or it had a develop, or they had a big hand in it. Was a SquareSoft though, and so again, SquareSoft had already been known for a lot of their great RPGs that they were starting to output, and so they took their style of RPG, turn based and all, added a few new flares to it and all, like as far as like pushing a button at the right time, and also that you can output more damage and all, or things like that. And was it was a pretty cool RPG, right? And all that kind of combined both worlds, right? Squaresoft's RPG with the charmness of like the Super Mario games and all that. I remember with this game, a friend of mine at the time, he rented this, and so when I would go over to his house, he rented it quite a bit, and I would watch him play it. So I remember having like the battle theme song stuck in my head, even though I never actually really played the game. But he used to rave about it, like, "Dude, this game is really fun and all." But I never played it back then, though. And just more recently, I did get the Super Mario RPG a little bit after it came out, 2 years ago or so, and so I've gotten a little ways into that, and it seems fun. It's definitely a a fun RPG to play through and all. you get to explore the Mushroom Kingdom in a lot of cool ways and all. So definitely seems like a fun game that I do want to try to beat at some point. But the original version came out back in 1996. And I also wanted to touch base a little bit on that I didn't quite mention last year, but I'll talk about it here a bit. Now, for me personally, we didn't get the Sega Saturn because that was our first generation system. Because again, we were Sega kids, we were going for the Sega. That we bet it all on the Saturn, right? At first, and so we got the Sega Saturn, and so my brother got it. I want to say early 1996, if I recall right. He kept it at his. He didn't bring it over right away though. He had it at a friend's house, I think, somewhere, and I want to say I think because he thought our dad would get mad, or I don't quite remember why, but he had told me he had gotten it, and I was like, I want to play it, I want to play it. And so finally he did bring it over to the house there and all, and excuse me, and he had gotten Virtual Fighter 2. So the Virtual Fighter 2 was the very first game that I saw on the fifth generation of gaming that we had at home, right? Because I'd already seen some games from PlayStation and all in the kiosks and all that at the stores, but it was like, when you get it at home and all that, and that I was just blown away by Virtual Fighter 2. I thought it looked amazing, and even then, to this day, it's still an excellent port. But basically, we had Virtual Fighter 2, Sega Rally Championship, and Virtual Cop that released kind of late in 1995. And so I forgot to mention those last year, right? But they came out late last year. And so at that time, right? Because again, things were advancing so quickly. So in this pocket of time, within those few months of like late 1995 and early 1996, I mean, the sales figures weren't quite showing it because PlayStation was already that it was starting to dominate. But those games right there in that small pocket of time, it gave a glimpse of hope to the Sega Saturn. Like, it's probably not going to beat the PlayStation, and probably not the Nintendo 64, but it can still be a healthy competitor in this generation. And because again, those games showed that 3D could be done actually pretty well on the Sega Saturn. Because again, the Sega Saturn on paper was, in a lot of ways more powerful than the PlayStation. It's just that the PlayStation, it was just much easier to program for, and because of that, it certainly made it look like most of the time that it could do better 3D graphics than the Sega Saturn. But if you look at like Virtual Fighter 2, Sega Rally Championship, and Virtual Cop, I mean, they have a different look than PlayStation games, because back then the graphic styles of each system was unique to themselves, but it looked good though. Like they looked like good 3D games for the time on a home console. And so again, it gave us a bit of hope, right? And all that, the Sega Saturn could be doing something. And not only those games, but also then early in 1996, we got releases like Panzer Dragoon 2 Zwei. And so that game there, right? So the follow up to the Panzer Dragoon game from last year. And so the graphics were really impressive on it, and all so much so that from what I read in that Console Wars book, that Sega was trying to use Panzer Dragoon 2's White to market the Sega Saturn, like, hey, look, the Saturn can do 3D, because the 3D on Panzer Dragoon 2 for the time is really impressive, and it's an excellent on-rail shooter. It's definitely one of my favorite games of all time. I absolutely love that game. Expanded more on what the first one was doing, and was yeah, just an excellent game on the Sega Saturn, and it came out fairly early in 1996. Um, and then we also had Virtual On, which was another pretty comparable port of the arcade, again on the Sega Saturn. So, if anything, it was looking like, okay, once, now that Sega, because I think they had developed like a new 3D engine that they could use on the Saturn to make some of their arcade ports more impressive than the initial batch of like Virtual Fighter and Daytona USA when the system first launched. And so again, they weren't quite arcade perfect, but they were very comparable ports though, right? I mean, it's like, okay, this is a fair representation of what the arcade is, and you get to play it at home, so that's all cool. And another game also that came out fairly early in 1996 was my personal favorite game this year, and that's Guardian Heroes by Treasure. So Gunstar Heroes was an amazing game, and then Treasure themselves were starting to do some really cool stuff on the Genesis. So I was really excited when I heard about this game, and that it was kind of like a beat 'em up, hack and slash sort of game, but with a little bit of RPG elements, and also where you make choices in the game where it affects the overall outcome of the game and all. It's kind of like an anime medieval sort of game that has this sort of same quirkiness character designs from like Gunstar Heroes and all, but set in more in a fantasy setting. And I absolutely love this game. It's very chaotic, very fun, great 2D graphics, and which really showed what the Saturn could do because all the sprites that could get on screen, and the size of the sprites, and all the chaotic effects happening, and all. It's really impressive. Uh, it does get bogged down by some slowdown, but it's still just a highly fun game and my personal favorite game of this year. And it came out here in 1996. Uh, I mean, it had enough of a following that eventually it came out later on the Xbox Live Arcade on the 360. But yeah, just a excellent game. And so again, so these were the batches of the games that I was playing on the Sega Saturn, right? That I was like, you know what, the Saturn, it's holding its own. The sales don't say that, right? And again, back then I wasn't like into exactly what the sales were of these systems. I had a feeling like the PlayStation was beating the Sega Saturn, but it wasn't until later that I really found out like just how much Sega was in the hole, right? But we had the Sega Saturn, and these were my games that I was playing, and I was pretty happy with them. Again, this is like late 1995 and early to mid 1996 or so. Because yeah, there was just a lot of great stuff that was on there, and then also we had a really good port of Street Fighter Alpha 2 that came out, and that was just an excellent fighting game too. Also, actually, I should say the arcade version of Street Fighter Alpha 2 came out this year. I think it came out in 1992 also for the Sega Saturn and the PlayStation 2 also, but I don't quite recall. But at the very least, in the arcade, Street Fighter Alpha 2 came out along with X-Men versus Street Fighter. And so last year we talked about Night Warriors, and then I think I mentioned, I don't know if I did, but X-Men Children of the Atom. But so Capcom was just starting to pump out these fighting games that were based off of the CPS2 arcade chip, right? Which again made the animation really high quality, and the games look very anime-like and all that. Just really smooth animation fighters and all that, but still retain the classic polished Street Fighter 2 style gameplay. And so Namco, like I said, or not Namco, Capcom was just pumping them out. So we had the Street Fighter Alpha series, right? So we already had Street Fighter and Street Fighter Alpha 2, and then we had X-Men Children of the Atom, and then I'm pretty sure we probably had Marvel versus Marvel superheroes, I think. I'm not sure. But then we also had X-Men versus Street Fighter. And so X-Men versus Street Fighter was kind of a big deal because it changed up the formula a bit where, first you have X-Men, with Street Fighter characters now, which was a pretty cool crossover. But the games were very fast paced, very crazy, super combo heavy, and with some crazy moves and all. And it was just a lot of fun to play. And it made it like a big fan favorite for competitive play too and all. And that was kind of because it kind of became like its own sub series with the X-Men versus Street Fighter, and eventually Marvel versus Capcom. But that'll come later. But this is the start of it, and so it was just kind of cool to see the X-Men characters right and all fight like the Street Fighter characters. So that was a blast. Um, but uh, but yeah, and throughout this whole time though, so I'll talk a little bit about it, what I know here, just kind of off the cuff of my memory or my knowledge here on this. So one thing that the Saturn, I mean, there was a lot of things that made the Saturn flounder, right? But one of the things was that it never ended up having like a mainline Sonic game. And so they got Nights into Dreams. So Nights into Dreams was one of the main developers was Yuji Naka, who he was one of the main creators of Sonic before, and also he was like the good dude that did like the 3D dungeons for Fantasy Star and a lot, and I think he had some hand in other classic Sega games. So he was assigned to make this Nights game, Nights into Dreams, which was a big Saturn game. And I'm glad he ended up doing that because Nights is cool. It's not Sonic, but it's cool. It's its own thing. It's very unique. One of the more unique experiences you can have on a fifth generation system. And it's very colorful, very bright. Plays very different where you're flying around in this sort of 3D fantasy space, and where you're trying to get like a high score, and then eventually you'll fight a boss and all. And it's set in this dreamlike kind of world, and it's a very imaginative game and all that, and probably one of the more popular games on the Sega Saturn. And it is fun for what it is. It's a very fun, unique game, definitely worth experiencing. and it was one of the few games too also that have had re-releases too in the years since, because a lot of Saturn games just didn't have re-releases, but this is another one and that did have one, and so where you can play like on modern systems. I think you still can, but anyways, so Sonic, what I understand, I think it was a division of Sega of America that was working on this 3D Sonic game. And so they were working on it, but it looks like it was just stuck in development hell for a while. And the name was going to be called Sonic Extreme, I believe. But it got to the point where they even showed like demos of it, like at some of the game shows and all. And it looked like it was like a 3D game where it had kind of like a fisheye view of the perspective of how you're playing the game. Uh, and ultimately, it looks like they could just never really get it off the ground. And at one point, I think I heard something that they were trying to use the engine that Yuji Naka, excuse me, and his team had developed for Knights to try to use it in the Sonic Extreme game. But that ended up causing some controversy, and ultimately they had to back out of it because I guess Yuji Naka didn't give his blessing on it or something like that. And so ultimately the whole project was canned for Sonic Extreme. But I think up until through 1996, if I recall, maybe even 1997, that this game was supposed to come out. And so there was a bit of hope for this is mainly for like the diehard Sega fans and all that, right? I was like, oh, when we get Sonic, things are gonna turn around, just like it happened with the Genesis. Well, that wouldn't have happened, even if the game would have come out, even if it would have been a decent Sonic game, it would have helped. But I seriously don't think it would have really made much of a dent, though, as far as like what Sony ended up doing. But but ultimately it was canned, and that would have happened sometime in 1996 or 97, I believe. So it was just another nail in Sega's coffin, right? And all that, it's just something that never came through. But there's a lot of video out there and all that. And I want to say, I think I heard that there's like a demo of it somehow that you can play too on this Sonic Extreme game that just never came out. But yeah, let's see. And then other games that came out too also this year. So these were, I think, when it came out on the PC, it was a Quake and Duke Nukem. So these were big on the PC, and I never actually experienced these games though until the Sega Saturn ports, because the Sega Saturn. So I think these are more in 1997 when these games came out, but it was a Power Slave, and then Duke Nukem 3D, and then Quake. They had really good ports on the Sega Saturn, and in a lot of ways, those are kind of the preferred versions to play on console. Um, and they were developed by this company called Lobotomy. They just somehow, I think it was called like the Slave Engine or something, the Slave Driver Engine or something like that. That created, so that it made some pretty cool 3D environments on the Sega Saturn. But I put Quake and Duke Nukem in here just because I know that those games were originally on the PC and probably where they were more popular, but I played them on the Sega Saturn. I thought they were really great ports of them too also. So because of that, I associate those games as Saturn games, even though I know that they originally came out on the PC. But actually, I think the Sega Saturn versions came out in 1997 though. Could be wrong, but they were around this time though. But yeah, so again, for me, the Sega Saturn was a great system and all that, and all. But Sony, though, the PlayStation was starting to do some really amazing things, though, and that it just couldn't be, it just got to the point that sometime later that year, I believe, is where we ended up getting the PlayStation somehow. I forgot how, but we got the PlayStation, and it was just because there was just too many great stuff that was starting to come out for it. And there was one major reason, though, that we ended up getting it. So I talked last year about how they were showing the demo of Final Fantasy VI, and how they were using Final Fantasy VI characters, but in a 3D environment. Well, what ended up happening was that the thought was that it was going to go to the Nintendo 64. But then Nintendo, when they announced that they were going cartridge based, that kind of killed that for them, because Sony had a certain vision on how, or not Sony, Squaresoft had a certain vision for what they wanted to do with their next Final Fantasy game that they just couldn't do on a cartridge. Part of that was because they wanted to use like these, have a lot of like cinematic CGI cutscenes in it. The amount that they wanted to do on it and all just wouldn't have fit on a cartridge. And also apparently because of some kind of limitation with the cartridge, they weren't able to get the frame rate at a playable level too also. Like I think I read something that they were messing around with like a So there's a popular Final Fantasy enemy in the series called Behemoth, and so they were testing out like a 3D rendering of it, and they just couldn't get it quite to run well on Nintendo 64 hardware. And so around that time, so they must have made the decision sometime in late 1996 or so is going to be my guess. Around that time, that they must have made the decision to say, you know what, we got to go with a CD based system. And Sony, I think it was maybe Sony that approached them, or they went to Sony. I don't quite know how that all worked out. There's a lot of great documentaries on this, and I've seen some of them. I just don't have the information fresh in my mind. But ultimately, they made the decision to go with Sony, probably because they were seeing the writing on the wall that the Saturn, well, it wasn't quite there, and Sony just seemed to be the better option, right? And all for them to to go move forward with, right, for their Final Fantasy project. That caused some bad blood between Nintendo and SquareSoft. That SquareSoft actually didn't release a game on the Nintendo system until I think like 2002 or 2003 or so, or something like that. It was because of this, because it was kind of a bad breakup between Squaresoft and Nintendo, because and Squaresoft was just kind of like, hey, we're just going where we have a vision, and we're going where we can better display that vision on. And since you guys decided to go cartridge, we can't do it on your system. There's a lot of drama that happened behind the scenes on that and all that. But that ended up becoming huge, though, which we'll get more into later in the later year and the next year, because the next Final Fantasy game going on the PlayStation was huge. And that was announced, I think, as sometime as early as 1996, because I remember seeing that in the magazines where they finally showed the very early concept of actual Final Fantasy VII, right? So not like the demo that we saw the previous year, but it's like now it has the characters that we know now, right? Cloud, Barrett, and Aerith. And so very early versions of that started coming out, like screenshots and all. And it was like, and this is running on the PlayStation. So then it became official. And so that was one of the main things that kind of I know for me personally, right, where I was really wanting to get a PlayStation now, and I think my brother to an extent too. I think because I know he ended up getting the PlayStation. Right, when we eventually had it at our house, and I think that was a big reason why, and I think for a lot of people too, and that's why I was talking about last year. That announcement there truly changed things a lot, because again, the PlayStation was already starting to have quite the success, but that right there, that the next Final Fantasy game was going to be on it, was monumental. It was a big deal, and again, because of the vision of the images that they were showing, right? I mean, just the thought of what a brand new Final Fantasy game on a more powerful hardware could be, coming off of like something that we had just seen, Final Fantasy VI on the Super Nintendo, was just very exciting. And that I feel like that was something that really gave the PlayStation a big push as to why people started migrating over to the PlayStation. So people that originally were Super Nintendo owners, right, were like, you know what? Sony's doing something here. And again, the Nintendo 64 didn't come out until later in 1996, right? So PlayStation had that era advantage on them. But it wasn't just that, though, right, that caused the PlayStation to really blow up. There was a lot of other things too, also. I mean, a lot of the games that were coming out on the PlayStation were just were becoming the big hits, the big third party games. So even though Sony didn't have like their first party, games, like the way Nintendo and Sega did, they were getting a lot of the big name third party games. So we had Crash Bandicoot. Yeah, they came out sometime in the fall, I think, of 1996, and so that for a while there, we were kind of thinking that was going to be like Sony's mascot. It was a very fun character. His game was very fun. Excuse me, and it had like a mascot appeal to him. And the graphics were just really amazing in this and all, where it looked really, for 3D polygons, even these what's considered now like low poly aesthetics, but to make it look very cartoon-like, where the animation looked like that and all that, was really impressive. And so the game was developed by Naughty Dog, and they really had an understanding of the PlayStation hardware, and it was just a very colorful, vibrant, full of animation game and all that. That looks, even today, it looks really amazing, and was kind of like again.
because again, there was three main games that came out this year. So we already talked about Knights. That was kind of like the flagship game for the Saturn, and you can almost think of Knights like the Saturn's mascot, since obviously we didn't have a Sonic game. Well, Crash Bandicoot, that was what it was to an extent for the PlayStation. Because the graphics that I'm sorry, the graphics, the commercials that would come out of it and all was pretty hilarious. Where there was somebody in a Crash Bandicoot costume and he was out there with a megaphone at Nintendo's headquarters, and he would be saying like, like, "Hey, plumber boy, come out," or something like that. Look what I got! I got the PlayStation over here. So it was kind of Sega-like, right? Where and that's why I feel like the Sony PlayStation combined the best of Sega in terms of like their marketing attitude and all, and because again they were out there acquiring a lot of big names like developers and licenses and all that, and also they're kind of more aggressive sort of marketing, like going to Nintendo's headquarters and making fun of them. That's very Sega like, but they were kind of very Nintendo like, where they were starting to get a lot of the third party developers onto their side. And so the PlayStation became the place where it had the more popular games that people wanted to play. Sega games are fun, right? And all those games that I just talked about earlier about Sega that came out this year are very fun. They're very quality games and all that. And Sega, even though it had a pretty big name and all that, it wasn't like they still weren't the more popular games. So where the PlayStation was getting a lot of those games, like Crash Bandicoot ended up becoming one of those games. We started to see sequels too, also. So again, the quick turnaround time, right from when we were getting sequels to franchises that were starting to become fan favorites. So like we had Tekken 2. I think Tekken 2 came out in the arcades the year prior, but this is when we got them on the PlayStation. So Tekken 2, it was big. It was a big improvement over the original Tekken. It became a big favorite on the PlayStation early on, and was a great fighter and had a lot of extras on it and all. So that was a cool thing too, is that Namco really knew how to port these games over, because you would have the arcade game, which was excellent, and then it would just load them up with a bunch of extras and all. When you got them to the home console, like the way you unlock characters, all the CG cutscenes and all that, and a lot of cool different options and all. And it was pretty much an arcade perfect port of the Tekken 2 also. So that was a great game right there. We had Twisted Metal 2, which is a sequel to the great Twisted Metal. It's improved on a lot of things on that too also as well. Just a very fun multiplayer car combat mayhem game and all. Just a lot of fun. And then we had two racing games that are some of my favorite of this generation, and there were also sequels to games that had come out last year. So there was Rage Racer, which was, I think this is actually the third installment in the series, because there was Ridge Racer Revolution, I think, which I think that's what it's called, which is, it just kind of added more to what the first one did. I think it had like maybe a new track or so. I'm not too familiar with that one there. But then there was Rage Racer. Now this was actually felt like the actual true sequel. It had a different track layout, improved graphics, and it was really fast too. Like you could go pretty fast in this game. Excuse me. And it was just a lot of fun and had like a Grand Prix mode. And so again, Namco just really knew how to do great. I don't know if Rage Racer was an actual arcade game or if it was made specifically for the PlayStation, but it felt like an arcade game. But then they had a lot of like cool modes that you can do in the game and all that really expanded the lifetime of the game and all, where it had just had a lot of meat on its bones basically, where like a lot of the Sega racers, they're really great, but they don't have a whole lot of like options or modes and all that, right? And all that you can engage into, outside of just, going through the track. And it's like, okay, cool, I'm done, right? But yeah, Rage Racer was a really fun racing game. And then also Wipeout XL. I love Wipeout XL. This is such a fun game. So again, it's where you're racing in these like kind of like hovercrafts and all set in the distant future. And the first one was pretty good. This one really improved on the gameplay by allowing you to kind of skid along the sides of the railings on the tracks. So basically, where it made it so that you can keep your speed up more, and the combat was just more refined, better selection of weapons. They felt more impactful too. Also, graphics were really amazing for the time and all, and really expanded more on this very futuristic setting, which I absolutely loved. And then it had a really amazing soundtrack from a lot of licensed, excuse me, electronica musicians or groups at the time. So like The Prodigy, Future Sound of London, the Chemical Brothers, and some other ones too that are a fluke, I think. Excuse me. And yeah, just a great game. Wipeout XL is just one of the funnest racing games out there for me. Still one of my favorite games of all time to this day. And yeah, I remember it was because of Wipeout XL and Rage Racer, I think, that ultimately made us get the PlayStation because we were seeing really good reviews on them. And I think also because we were really into that music back then. Actually, now that I'm thinking back, I think it was Wipeout XL that prompted us to buy the PlayStation, also because aside of the Final Fantasy VII news, but also because of Wipeout XL, because we were really into that music. And so the fact that a video game had music from those groups there and all, and then we ended up getting the game, we absolutely loved it, and so that's where so so roughly about halfway, maybe towards the fall of 1996, is when I think we got the PlayStation, where we finally became a two console home instead of just always being just stuck with Sega. And it was the PlayStation that did it, and I'm sure that it was for a lot of people too also right back then. There was just too many good stuff coming out on the PlayStation that you just couldn't ignore. But then so we had those great games, and then we also had two other games that became monumental as well too. And not only for the PlayStation, but just there were series that were very long lasting that are still going to this day. And the first one that came out somewhat early in 1996 was Resident Evil. And so Resident Evil, I'm sure if you know anything about video games, you know this series, or even if you don't know about video games, Resident Evil is such a big name, but it became the first major, I would say, successful survival horror game. And so you control either Chris or Jill, and you're from the Stars police division or whatever they are. And so you explore this mansion that you end up finding out is full of zombies, and there's a conspiracy there behind a company that's behind it all. And it was just excuse me, it was a lot of fun, where it kind of combines like Metroid style gameplay, where you're exploring different rooms, finding an item that it lets you advance further in the mansion and its surrounding areas. And yeah, it was just, so it had that fun gameplay loop. The tank controls in it and all were, they were a little weird to get used to at first, but once you got used to them and all, it just made the game a lot of fun, and it actually added to the tension of the game. And it was creepy at the time. I mean, I'm sure we all jumped at that when that damn dog jumped through the windows. And it was just like a new experience, right? That's what was cool about this time. Again, like I've said before, is that we were getting new experiences that could be done on the previous generation because of the technology behind it. And so it introduced also graphical style. Well, I don't know if it introduced it, but it was probably the one that made it the most popular, where it was 3D polygonal characters on a pre-rendered backdrop. And so what that helped a lot of developers do was that it gave you as realistic as possible for the time characters, uh, because you can put most of your polygons on that character and not worry about the backdrop so much, because the backdrops were just like pre-rendered, right? And so it was a pretty cool effect. I actually wish they would bring the style back, but I don't. I think it just because now, since developers could actually make all of this in real time and all, I'm sure why it went away. But it was a pretty cool graphical technique back then, and Resident Evil was like the one that really popularized it. And so, yeah, it became a huge hit this year for Capcom, and would eventually, as you'll see as we go along through the years, just how big of an impact this game had. And I remember this one friend of ours, uh, he brought it over to a party one time, and so we got to play the game. And after I played it, I was like, "Hey man, can I borrow this? Because this looks this looks amazing." And so he let me borrow the game, and so I ended up beating it. And yeah, Resident Evil was just a very very fun time. It was very revolutionary, and even though it had some horrendous acting in it, it's just part of its charm now. And so I almost don't like playing Resident Evil if I don't get to hear that original acting. But yeah, it just became a monumental game. But another game too, also that was big too this year, and it came out fairly late this year, was Tomb Raider. And so Tomb Raider, developed by Core Designs, it was originally going to be a Saturn game. So I think the main dude behind Core Designs, I think his name was Toby, I think. And so he had been vocal about preferring Sega over the PlayStation, at least at first. And so Tomb Raider was originally going to be a Saturn exclusive, but eventually the PlayStation was just having too much success. And so I'm pretty sure somewhere along the development, they're like, no, we need to release this on the PlayStation too, because it ended up coming out on both systems, right? I think around the same time, or maybe they had a bit of a staggered release and all, but they came out roughly around the same time. And the PlayStation actually, this was one of the moments where Sony was already beating the Saturn, but this is where it became really evident. Like, okay, the PlayStation is the better system because when you compare both versions, the PlayStation definitely runs smoother, looks nicer. I mean, and it's not a bad version on the Sega Saturn. For some reason, if you just want to try out the Sega Saturn and all, or for us back then that only had the Sega Saturn, it was still a good way to play the game because that's where I first played it. That's where I fell in love with the game and all was on the Sega Saturn, and it played good, and it was a fun experience. Afterwards, though, we rented it on the PlayStation, once we had that system, and we were like, okay, this does look better on the PlayStation. One thing that I remember it kind of sold me on the game more on the PlayStation was again this graphical technique, where in one of the stages, I think when you're in Rome, there's like this hand that's part of like the what was the Midas, the god Midas or whatever that Midas person character was. And so if you stand on the hand, it turns you into gold. So on the Saturn, when you turn into gold, it's just kind of like you just turn into like this kind of like a tan sort of texture comes over your whole body, and it looks kind of generic, not nothing too impressive. But on the PlayStation, you actually it looks more gold, and it has like this reflections and all on the textures and all that look really impressive. And I remember back then thinking, oh damn man, yeah, the PlayStation really can do better graphics. So okay, and so that's where I mean I still love the Saturn, and we still hung on to the system until its very end, but it was where I was like, okay, the PlayStation is better than the Saturn, right? And again, one of the many decisions that prompted us to become a two console household. But yeah, but those two games were very monumental, and as you'll see later on, right, and all the different games that they had on that came out on the PlayStation that made it successful. But it was also starting to become the place for RPGs as well too. The Saturn had some RPGs and all, or like RPG like games, but like I think, I don't know if it came out this year, but because the Saturn did have some decent RPGs, like there was Shining Wisdom, which was like an action RPG, but that was pretty good. Had Albert Odyssey also, which was pretty good. Um, but it also had let's see, Shining in the Holy Ark. When did this game come out? Okay, yeah. So this game came out actually in 1996. So Shining in the Holy Ark. So it was part of the Shining series of games, but this one was more like a first-person 3D dungeon crawler. But it was done really well though, and yeah, it came out in 1996. It was actually a prequel to Shining Force 3, which that game comes out, in the following year. Uh, but so the Saturn did have some RPG like games, and then there was also actually, now that I'm thinking about it too, let's see, yeah, another game too also that came out on the Sega Saturn this year. It was Dark Savior. Yeah, it did. Okay, it came out late 1996, and yeah, so Dark Savior was another cool game on the Saturn that it was made from the people that did Landstalker, and it had sort of the same perspective, kind of like an isometric view, only you can kind of adjust the camera a little bit. But the battle system was different on this one though, where it was more like a one-on-one fighter. And then and it also had like the way the story plays out can be different depending on the outcome of how you perform in the first part of the game. And actually, it's a really cool concept. Dark Savior, I really like. I really enjoy the game actually. If it had a more traditional like action RPG combat in it, where like your typical Zelda or Landstalker and all, I would have actually really enjoyed this game even more. But because the battle system it's a little weird, it kind of knocks it down a few points. But even then, it's an excellent game. Dark Savior came out on the Sega Saturn. Definitely check it out if you're exploring the Sega Saturn library of games. But when it came down to it, though, the PlayStation ended up becoming more the place for RPG like games. And some of the major ones that we started seeing this year, there was a game called Beyond the Beyond or something like that. That game I think is okay. I've never actually played it and all, but it seems like it was just okay. But then there was also like Suikoden, which was a became a big fan favorite. And we just recently got a re-release of the game. Was it earlier this year? Yeah, I think earlier this year. But yeah, Suikoden, and yeah, that's a great RPG. One of my favorite games of all time, also. And I remember when we first got that game and all, it was just another game, right? And all that was like, okay, well, I'm glad we got the PlayStation. Otherwise, we would have been missing out on this. And there was also another game too, which I don't think this game was too good, but it set the stage for a huge series of games that ended up following, and that was Revelations of Persona. So I talked about earlier, right? I'm getting into Persona 5 and all. That series ended up becoming huge. The first initial games of this and all, I believe. I don't know if they originated on the PlayStation, but this is where it started kind of making a name for itself. Because again, Persona didn't really blow up until later entries, but it was getting its start here. And so yeah, I mean it just had more games, right? And all. For me, the PlayStation and the Saturn were neck and neck for me, right? For me, they both had excellent games during this year that I wanted to play, but the majority of the games that were on the PlayStation, or I should say, the majority of players wanted to go towards the PlayStation because they were just the games that appealed more to the general audience, basically. Um, but yeah, it definitely started making a name for itself, which was important for it that it made a name for itself because the Nintendo 64 came out in the States this year. And the Nintendo 64 sold really well initially, really well. And a big part of that was because of its packing game, or not. No, it didn't come in as a packing game. I don't know. It didn't, right? No, but it came out as a launch title. Was Super Mario 64, and Super Mario 64 was one of those generational games that just truly changed the industry in a lot of ways, and it brought Mario into the 3D realm. It wasn't the first 3D platformer that was out there. There were some other attempts at that, like we talked about. I think we talked about Jumping Flash last year, but this is Mario though, and it was created by Shigeru Miyamoto. And so he just has a way of making games just not only fun but very revolutionary, or to where they set a standard for video games going forward. So kind of like Mario set the standard for platformers back in the day, wasn't necessarily the first platformer game, but it was the first major big one. Same thing with Mario 64. It just made playing in the 3D space fun. The way you can control Mario, how nimble he is, and all that, and the controls just felt right. And with the inclusion of the analog stick, as the default controller for the Nintendo 64, it was just for a lot of people, I'm sure, right, was just a joy to play through because there was a lot of people that did hold off on getting a new system until the Nintendo 64 came out. Because again, like a lot of casual gamers, they know Nintendo, and that's kind of what they were sticking with. So there was a lot of people that probably held on to their Super Nintendos until the Nintendo 64 came out. Because I think I could be wrong on this, but I think it was in this generation for somebody from Nintendo said something like the next generation doesn't start until Nintendo says it starts. I think. Maybe I'm getting the companies wrong and the generation wrong, but I could swear that was a something that somebody said at some point here. But ultimately basically saying like Nintendo was really banking on their name, right? That even though they were seeing Sony have a lot of success, they're like, that's fine. When we come out, we'll show them what's up, right? Because we're Nintendo. And so initially, because again, the Nintendo 64 came out kind of late in 1996, and that stretch right there from 1996, the PlayStation and the Nintendo 64 were kind of neck and neck. And with the Saturn, starting to sadly fall behind. But so it seemed like it was going to be a two-horse race, right, for these two big competitors in this generation. And so it was kind of an exciting time for that there, right? Like, oh, because Mario, right? I was like, this is something else. So It was just kind of it seemed like Nintendo was gonna get a one up on it though, but there were some things that was gonna start holding it back though, and a big part of that was that they decided to go cartridge. So, and I think the kind of popular thought is because ultimately, spoiler alert, Sony took this round in this generation, right, by quite a large margin. But I think the initial quick thought is that had Nintendo gone CD, that they would have taken over, right? Or they would have still reigned king, right, during this generation and potentially going forward. I don't, you know, I don't know about that because the advantage that Sony had, and because basically, if you make a CD based system, the system is going to generally be more expensive. Your games are cheaper, but your system's going to be more expensive. And there's a lot that goes into that, like producing the system and all that, all the different components of it, right? And all like the CD lasers and all the other stuff that goes into making a CD based system. Or a cartridge based system, it's going to be cheaper to make. Now the games are going to be more expensive, but the system is going to be cheaper to make. The advantage that Sony had over this is that Sony was already an established electronics company that probably I'm speculating here, but that they probably had a lot of connections as far as how they can produce the system as cheaply as possible because of that. Had Nintendo gone into with a CD based system, well, at this time, they would have needed to get someone else involved. Like, well, they kind of did, right, with Philips previously, or how they attempted to do it with Sony previously. And so, how that would have benefited them in the background, like as far as like who would have gotten like the commission on the systems and all that, that could have hurt their business also too. I don't know for sure, but I don't think it was just as easy as had they made a CD based system that they would have dominated. I think that there might have been more of a reason for Nintendo to do this outside of what they originally announced, which I think was to prevent pirating of games, and also that they just didn't like the loading in CD based games. I think there was also some other stuff that happened in the background from a more business standpoint. I'm just speculating. I don't know for sure, but that's kind of my thought on it. But ultimately, because they did go cartridge based, though, that limited them in a lot of ways, though, right? So again, games were starting to become very cinematic, very memory intensive, with music and all that. And so, excuse me, because Nintendo started going with a cartridge format, it deterred a lot of third party companies out there. The notable one being Squaresoft, right? Like I mentioned before, right? They were like, okay, well, if you guys are going to go cartridge, we have a certain vision, right? And we're going with Sony. So a lot of the main developers that the Super Nintendo had, or Nintendo previous to this, Capcom, Konami, Squaresoft, just to name a few, they were like, yeah, you know what? We're gonna go with Sony, and so the Nintendo lost a lot of them. Enix, I think, also in Japan, I think they had announced fairly early on that the next Dragon Quest game was going to come out on the PlayStation, probably for similar reasons. So that was all a big blow to Nintendo. So you had Super Mario 64, which is amazing, right? But it wasn't. But now it really had to rely on its IPs because it wasn't going to have the support from third party anymore. As we started seeing as the generation went on, that a lot of third parties just abandoned ship. And so what ended up being on the Nintendo 64 is that you did have a lot of great Nintendo games. There was a lot of great Nintendo games, and I'll go over a few more here in a bit. But you just didn't have those other big heavy hitters that say like the Nintendo had. Those all went to mainly to Sony, to some extent Sega. And that was kind of the what ended up setting the stage for Sony to become the winner in this generation. The other thing too, also because they went cartridge, the the release schedule of the games was slower too also, and also you just didn't have that many games on the Nintendo 64. I mean, the PlayStation has like a ridiculous amount of games. Same thing with like even the Sega Saturn had quite a decent amount of games on there, where the Nintendo 64 only had in the hundreds, as far like mid hundreds or so. I think like the overall amount of games that came out for the system, and I think Japan included. I don't know exactly for sure the number, but it wasn't like that much. So then Nintendo's motto was more quality over quantity. And sure, a lot of the Nintendo games were good quality, but not all of them. I mean, there was still some shovelware on the Nintendo 64, and again, there wasn't a whole lot of variety either, right? And so again, that's ultimately what kind of led to. I mean, the Nintendo 64 did okay, but just nowhere near what the PlayStation did. But yeah, but Super Mario 64, very revolutionary and all this, the way you can control a 3D character, kind of changing the formula of what we would expect in a platform where this became more exploration, finding the main goal of the game, right, is to find these stars and all the different objectives you do to find it. It became very addicting. It's, just a very colorful game. And being the first 64-bit system, it did have some advantages over like the 32-bit systems. Part of that being that the textures on the games didn't quite look as like how can I say? They looked more fuller. They looked more um, defined as what you would see like on a PlayStation or Saturn game. Because sometimes with the PlayStation or Saturn, you would get like these wobbly textures sometimes and all, and so it made it look like some of these textures and these 3D environments were being taped together basically, that they could almost fall apart at any point. If that makes any sense, for the Nintendo 64 world seemed a little bit more solid. But because it was on CD, or I'm sorry, on cartridge though, sometimes they seem to lack detail though also. And then also they had a bit of a kind of like a foggy, muddy look to them sometimes too as well. But when the Nintendo 64 had good graphics, you could tell that it was a bit of a step above from a 32-bit system. Not by a lot, but by some. And but other games that came out this year, so for the Nintendo 64, so we had Pilot Wings 64, which is another launch game, and it's cool. I mean, it's kind of like Pilot Wings. It seems like it was more like a tech demo for the system that it was coming out on. So like the first one was to, I guess, kind of show off the Mode 7, and this one here to show off some of the Nintendo 64's 3D capabilities. I've played a little bit of it and all. I'm like, I can kind of take it or leave it. But Mario Kart 64 came out this year, and so Mario Kart 64 is Mario Kart 64. It was a fun game and a great multiplayer game, and it kind of started showing though what the Nintendo 64 could be good at, which is multiplayer, because it was the only system in this generation that had 4 controller ports right off the bat. And so it was, I think that on the box of the Nintendo system, it was advertised as like the fun machine or something like that. And so I think that maybe it was their plan already from well, yeah, it must have been their plan from the get go, obviously, since they had the 4 controller ports. But I think that that's one of the things that they really wanted to emphasize on, was just bringing people together to play multiplayer and all that. And something that Nintendo still excels at to this day, because it's very family oriented. You get everyone involved, 4 controllers, or 4 people can play at the same time. And Mario Kart 64 was one of the first games that really, emphasized that and all. And so it was just a lot of fun. It's I know that for a lot of people have a lot of nostalgia for this game and all. I never played it really back in the day. So, when you go back to it now, it seems a little archaic, right, compared to more modern Mario Kart games. But at the time, I can imagine it was a blast to play through, right, especially if you were playing it multiplayer. And it was it was definitely showing what the system could be fun at. And I think why a lot of people have a lot of fond memories of the system was because that's what I hear a lot from people that had the system originally, was that it was just fun to play with other friends or family members. And so excuse me, I can see why. Because one thing about the Nintendo 64 is that the games that it did have on it, they seem to be remembered more fondly in a lot of ways than games on the Saturn or the PlayStation. Even though, again, right, the PlayStation just sold like a million systems or whatever, but the Nintendo 64 only sold like in the 30,000s, I believe, or 30. I mean, I'm sorry, 30 millions. And but I think a lot of it was because you didn't have a lot of games on the system, but the ones that you did, were you held on to very dearly, and the good ones were pretty good, right, for what they were. And but yeah, but and again, the Nintendo 64 didn't have a whole lot of output of games during this year, and but it was that one, and then also Wave Race 64, which is actually one of my favorite racing games too. Also, it was just a very fun game to play with its um, water effects and all. It's something about it. The game just feels just really. well done. And to this day, I can't really find a racing game that mimics the physics of this game. Maybe that's just nostalgia, but when I go back and play Wave Race, it's just such a well done game and that feels really realistic as you're going through the waves and all that, but it's just a lot of fun to play too, also. And yeah, it was just a Wave Race 64, one of my favorite games on this generation here. But another game that came out too also during this stretch in 1996 on the Nintendo 64, which I was kind of interested in, was a Killer Instinct Gold. And so we talked before about how when Killer Instinct first came out, and that's sort of like what people were, or Nintendo was sort of advertising on what their games were going to look like, was using that kind of graphical style and everything. And so that's what the games on the Nintendo 64 were going to look like and all. When Killer Instinct Gold was kind of the ultimate revelation on that. And because we had gone, so Killer Instinct, right, and then Killer Instinct Gold in the arcades, and in the arcades, so the games run like where it's the backgrounds where it's all like CGI graphics and almost like it's full motion video almost, but like pretty well done though. Have a lot of detail in the background. It looks pretty cool, and the effect it's actually really impressive on Killer Instinct and especially on Killer Instinct Gold. So when the system came out that it was going to be cartridge based, a lot of people were speculating, well, how is that going to be done on a home console because it's cartridge, so you don't have the memory to like have video like that on your background. So what they did was that the characters are still kind of like 3D modeled, so like kind of like you would see like in Donkey Kong, for example, only with Killer Instinct fighters. But the background they did it in 3D, like polygons, and it runs at 60 frames per second, and also it still looked impressive, right, for what it is, but it definitely showed the limitations of the Nintendo 64 and that their ultimate their early promise of like that games were going to look like, in the arcades and all the way those games looked like wasn't quite fulfilled, and again, it was just showing the limitations of the cartridge. But for what it is though, Killer Instinct Gold is still a really nice looking game and plays pretty impressively, and it's was a early one of the few fighting games on the Nintendo 64 that came out that was pretty decent.
But yeah, but definitely an interesting time for this year, right? And there was just a lot of quality software this year. And I'm sure there's a lot of games that are missing now. I know PC was kind of starting to create its own sort of niche audience as well too for gamers. And that I'm sure I didn't touch on a lot of those kind of games there as I'm just not too familiar with that stretch or in PC gaming or just PC gaming in general. But I'm sure there was a lot of cool stuff that was coming out there too. But yeah, it was a great year. Like I said, right, each system had kind of like its main flagship game that it just felt that there was going to be some really healthy competition throughout this generation. But starting next year is where one of them just really took off, right? And I guess you can pretty much already guess which one from what I've already talked about. But for the Saturn, right, and all, we had Nights into Dreams. For the PlayStation, we had Crash Bandicoot. And so, for the Nintendo 64, obviously Super Mario 64. And so it just kind of felt like, oh, these three systems, they have their mascots and all that. Is it going to be like another Sonic versus Mario? But now we got three of them. Is it going to be Knights, Crash, and Mario? Again, it wasn't quite that and all, but at least for at the time, it felt like that to me anyways, right? And again, this is where I was younger. The information out there of like the sales figures and all that wasn't quite as widely as available as it is now, where you can just kind of fact check this stuff a lot quicker now. And so for me personally, it was an exciting time for that. I never owned a Nintendo 64 until later, but having the Sega Saturn and the PlayStation at home was pretty cool for me and definitely left me with a lot of fun gaming memories. And so this is during the stretch right here, it was a pretty cool time to be a gamer. But that's where I got for 1996. I think I'll leave it here on this one. And I'm sure I miss out, like I said, on a lot of things and all that. But I think these are some of the more major games that came out during the stretch here, and was truly an impressive year for gaming. But that's what I got here. So we will be back hopefully next week. I actually might be out of town next week for a bit, so I don't know if I will have an episode ready to go. Um, Maybe I can try to do something where I can record it a little earlier. I'm not quite sure. But if I don't get to it next week, then we'll follow up with the following week on it. And yeah, other than that, though, have a great week. And
We will see you on the next one.